Hello and welcome to the first video in a series I hope to continue on this channel called Spoiled. I'll review films and television shows by first giving a general overview and then promptly steering into quote-unquote spoiling the film or TV show for the purpose of exploring interesting aspects of the plot, characters, or setting. The first film in the series is Queer, directed by Luca Guadagnino, whose most recent film, Challengers, took over the cultural zeitgeist with its tennis and bisexual themes. With Queer, we retain the LGBTIA representation, but travel back in time to meet an American man spending time in Mexico during the early 1950s. Let's run down some initial facts that may or may not influence you to watch the film. The runtime for the film is 2 hours and 17 minutes. Quite a commitment. The director is Luca Guadagnino, who has a tendency to present films that tend to last very long in the cultural mind. The cast includes 007, Daniel Craig, Drew Starkey, Jason Schwartzman, who is a little chunky in his representation here in Queer, and Omar Apollo. The asterisk is intended to be slightly shady. He does make a very short appearance. I will say that he does make a pretty great effort, but it was clear that they didn't want to put too much pressure on him, and they gave him the minimum of lines possible in order for him to get an acting credit. The ideal audience for this film is a cinephile who enjoyed Beau is Afraid and wished there was a gay, sadder version of the film. So let's get into the source material. Queer is based on William S. Burroughs' unfinished novella of the same name. Burroughs is a beatnik writer, which includes writers that you might be familiar with, such as Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. Burroughs primarily wrote autobiographical and experimental fiction that highlighted the psyche of a self-referential protagonist with a heroin addiction and flexible sexual proclivities. William S. Burroughs is a very controversial figure, and in real life was in Mexico to escape criminal prosecution related to drugs, but then made even more issues for himself when he killed his wife. Yes, he actually did that, and he says it was all a game, and so there wasn't really an intent, but in my opinion, his explanation has very significant holes. He eventually fled to Mexico to evade prosecution, and Queer is inspired by his experience as an American expat in Mexico. Except in the film version, there's no reference to a wife or murder, and I would say maybe I am true crime pilled, but I would definitely be interested in that version of a film as well. So let's get into the spoiled parts. But first, let's talk about a quote that I found from a Goodreads review that I think really encapsulates the theme that was attempted to be captured in this film. In deep sadness, there is no place for sentimentality. It is as the mountains. A fact. There it is. When you realize it, you cannot complain. It is a very difficult task attempting to capture sadness as fact in a visual art medium. While Guadagnino's attempt was valiant, the execution fell a little flat and led to a bloated, failed effort. Let's get into the analysis. In the film, Daniel plays William Lee, an independently wealthy queer American man living in Mexico. His days seem endless, filled with drinking and gossiping with friends or frenemies, until he meets a young American vet, Eugene Allerton, played by Drew Starkey. Lee tries to determine Eugene's sexuality, courting him until it becomes clear that Eugene is willing to entertain a sexual encounter with Lee. However, because Eugene is aware of Lee's heroin habit, Eugene intentionally distances himself from Lee, which leaves Lee distraught and confused. In an attempt to fix his heroin habit, Lee plans a trip to South America, and in a last-ditch effort to win Eugene's affection, Lee invites Eugene on the promise that Eugene only has to show Lee affection twice a week. Lee hopes to gain access to a telepathic drug that can help strengthen Lee's relationship with Eugene. On the trip, the tenuous relationship between Lee and Eugene is brought to the brink as Lee's heroin withdrawal symptoms disrupt their planned itinerary. They finally make it to a part of Ecuador where they meet an American scholar, played by Leslie Manville, studying the telepathic drug, which we know of today as ayahuasca. In a guided trip, Eugene and Lee experience a psychedelic tour that is visually represented by CGI rendering of their bodies flowing in and out of each other. The final third of the film explores an aging Burroughs who fails to reconnect with Eugene after leaving for America for 2 years. The film ends with a dying Burroughs who is cuddled by an apparition of Eugene in his final breaths. Daniel Craig is without question the cornerstone of the film. In my opinion, the most compelling scene is where we see Lee inject heroin for the first time. Prior to the heroin injection, we see a verbose and gregarious Lee deftly navigate the American queer expat community. But the drug use solidifies the depth of his loneliness in a city that feels lively and vivacious. Drew Starkey plays a strong, quiet counterpart to Daniel Craig's loud Lee, but Starkey does not have enough of a presence in both the script and in the movie itself to provide an equivalent performance. The film has a lot of highlights, but they are diminished by weaker scenes overstaying their welcome. I believe that Guadagnino should have trusted those initial scenes meant to establish Lee's character. It felt that the film had to constantly remind the audience of the sadness within Lee that is clearly and viscerally felt from the start. Overall, I recommend this film for anyone who is looking to expand their queer media exposure and looking to see what Guadagnino and Daniel Craig are capable of. Anyway, I did enjoy my experience, and I'm looking to see more entries from Guadagnino. It was recently announced that he has cast Austin Butler to play Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. This will definitely be an interesting adaptation, and I'm looking very much forward to that film being released. Until next time, this was Spoiled.